The Celestial Empire, or Points and Pickings of Information about China and the Chinese, by George Mogridge. Chapter 31. A few observations on botany and other things. You will readily conclude that an empire so widely extended as that of China, and comprehending almost every degree of heat and cold, must necessarily abound in trees and plants and flowers of almost every variety. From the giants of the forest to the smallest herbs, this is no doubt the case, though it by no means follows that we should be well acquainted with them. It has pleased God to beautify the earth with vegetation, and His almighty hand we see in flower and shrub and plant and tree. An extended knowledge of the vegetation of China is very desirable. Where little is known, much cannot be told, and all who are interested in the subject are well aware that very little of botany is known in China. The Celestials have not been favoured with a Piton de Tournefort, a Bernard de Jussieu, or a Linnaeus. There is no lack of Chinese treatises on botany and illustrated herbals, but he who clearly comprehends the meaning of the one and really admires the drawings of the other must be somewhat singular both in his intellect and his taste. It is hardly likely that you have turned over the pages of the Chinese Pun Sao Pe Yao, and still less likely, if you have, that the work has added to your wisdom. Amusement you would certainly find in the 7 volumes of the Pun Sao, containing, as they do, many more than 1,000 fanciful sketches of plants, animals, and minerals used medicinally in China. But to place any reliance on their correctness would be very hazardous. They excite some wonder, they afford some amusement, but very little indeed do they extend the knowledge of botany. The Chinese are certainly not botanists themselves, and it is equally certain that the botanists of other nations have no enlarged acquaintance with the plants of China. Peter Osbeck, a pupil of Linnaeus, who went to Canton in the year 1750 as chaplain to a Swedish East Indiaman, did all he could to obtain botanical knowledge, but his actual observations being limited to the plants growing about Canton and Whampoa, and such other as he could procure, his success was not very great. When the embassy of Lord Macartney visited China, enlightened botanists attended it, but the jealousy of the Celestials prevented them from making discoveries to the extent they desired. Still, considerable lists of Chinese plants were made out by them, and these have increased the desire of botanists to know more of China's botanical resources. Dr. Clark Abel, a very scientific man, was attached to the mission of Lord Amherst to China as medical attendant and naturalist to the embassy, and a very valuable collection he made of natural and botanical productions. But almost all his collected specimens went to the bottom of the ocean in the Alceste ship, which was wrecked. 300 packages of seeds, many of them from unknown species, were among them. Had it not been for this unlooked-for misfortune, the botany of China would have been much better understood. Dr. Abel says, "After leaving the wreck, I had the mortification of hearing that the cases containing the seeds had been brought upon deck, and emptied of their contents by one of the seamen to make room for some linen of one of the gentlemen of the embassy. Thus, it appears that 300 packages of Chinese seeds, many of them unknown to Europeans, were thrown away to make room for a gentleman's linen. I remember reading of a servant who, when sent on an errand, committed an error of the same kind. Having to wait outside a gentleman's house, he took some bread and cheese from his pocket to eat, and perceiving what he thought were a few onions lying in the sunshine, he picked them up to relish his bread and cheese. While in the act of eating them, he happened to be observed. The roots were tulip roots of the most costly kind, so that it was well the discovery made, for otherwise he might soon have demolished 50 pounds worth of tulip roots. This servant and the sailor who threw away the Chinese seeds are fit persons to be mentioned together. Commerce, with all its restrictions, has more facilities in China than science, being more immediately connected with the wants and inclinations of the people. It may, therefore, be long before botanical knowledge will be much extended in the imperial dominions. Among the English residents of China who have paid attention to botany, the names of Beale, Reeves, and Livingston ought to be mentioned, and the botanical garden and aviary established at Macau by Mr. Beale are proofs of zeal in his scientific enterprise. Among the remarkable trees and plants of China may be mentioned the camphor tree, 50 feet high and sometimes 20 feet in circumference, the mo wang or king of the woods, the timber of which resembles rosewood, the nan mo, a cedar used for imperial dwellings and temples only, the croton, from which tallow is obtained, the tsi shu or lacquer shrub, from which fine varnish distills like gum, the turmeric tree, the ping tao or oak peach tree, the mulberry, so necessary for the food of silkworms, and the bamboo. But as the tea plant is more important to China than any other vegetable production, I will speak of it at once. The culture and preparation of the tea plant in China presents to the eye a series of interesting scenes in the laying out of the ground, the growth of the plant, the picking of the buds and leaves, and the varied processes through which this important article passes before it is packed in the tea chest. It is now near 200 years since tea was first brought into England. The Dutch East India Company imported it to Europe, and in 1666, the year in which the Great Fire of London took place, the Lords Arlington and Ossory brought a small quantity of it to this country. Since then, the finest ships in the finest mercantile navy of the world have been employed in its transportation from China to Great Britain. The tea plant is a native of China or Japan, and probably of both. It has been used among the natives of the former country from time immemorial. It is only in a particular tract of the Chinese Empire that the plant is cultivated, and this tract, which is situated on the eastern side between the 30th and 33rd degrees of north latitude, is distinguished by the natives as the tea country. The more northern part of China would be too cold, and farther south the heat would be too great. There are, however, a few small plantations to be seen near Canton. Great care is required to cultivate tea with success. The ground is well prepared, after which holes to receive the tea seeds are made in rows 4 or 5 feet asunder. These rows and the ground between them must be kept thoroughly free from weeds. The seed of the turnip in this country has many enemies in the shape of weevils, wireworms, flies, blight, and other things. And tea seed in China is so precarious from many causes that it is necessary to put 6 or 8 seeds in every hole to secure a fair prospect of success. That the leaves may be gathered without inconvenience, the plants are prevented from growing beyond a certain height, and 3 years are allowed to pass before any leaves are plucked. The tea plant in blossom is an attractive object, its white flowers much resembling those of the white rose, so common in the hedges of England. The seeds of the plant, which are white, are contained in the green pod which succeeds the flower, 2 or 3 in each pod. Though the tea plant will grow in different soils and situations, yet light stony soil, somewhat hilly, produces leaves of the finest quality. Teas are black or green, and of both kinds there are several qualities. Of the black kind, there are the Pekoe, black-leaved Pekoe, Souchong, Congo, and Bohea. And of the green, the Tuan K, Sion Skin, Hyson, Gunpowder, and Young Hyson. This is so clear that I dare say you will now remember the names of both kinds. You must not suppose that the different black teas are in reality different plants. They grow on the same plant, but they are gathered at different times. The Pekoe is plucked when the tea leaves are just budding forth. The black-leaved Pekoe is gathered a little later. The Souchong later still, and so on, till the oldest leaves are gathered, and these are Bohea. The meaning of Bohea is Ta Cha, large tea. Kongu means Kung Fu, labor or assiduity. Souchong means Siu Chung, small or scarce sort. Pekoe means Pak Hu, white down. So now you have the meaning of the names of all the black teas. But though the young tea leaves are better than when they are older, that is not the only reason why one tea is dearer than another. Some teas are picked with more care than others, and prepared with much greater trouble. Thus, Hyson, which means flourishing spring, is not only gathered early, but every separate leaf is twisted and rolled by the hand with great care. And gunpowder is carefully picked Hyson. The roundest and the best rolled leaves are picked out so that they have a more uniform and grain-like appearance than the Hyson. Gunpowder tea is indeed often called by the Chinese chu cha or pearl tea. In common teas, there is more of the wood or stalk of the plant than in the better kinds. Both black and green teas are dried by fire, and the heat in some measure curls them both, but the fire has most to do in curling the black teas and the hand in curling the green. The tales about green tea being dried in copper and brass pans and turned green by the verdigris or rust of the metal are all idle reports. Green tea, like the black, is dried in iron pans. The green tea plant and the black tea plant are different, but the difference between the two kinds of tea is more owing to the manner of preparing them than to any other cause. Indeed, it is said that green tea can be made from the black tea plant. In baking teas, the green are used more tenderly than the black, for while the latter are only shaken into the chests, the former are pressed down by the foot. The exportation of tea from China to Great Britain, according to Captain Pedding, is at the rate of £48 million per year. The Chinese drink their tea without cream or sugar, and now I dare say that you know more about tea than ever you did before. I mentioned rice when I spoke of Dane's Island. You shall have a few more words about its cultivation. Rice, perhaps, furnishes food for a greater part of the human race than any other grain. It is cultivated and eaten in almost all parts of the Eastern world. The East Indies and China, Egypt, and the north of Africa, America, especially Carolina, Spain, Italy, and Turkey, all cultivate it. Rice is sown either on the water or on the mud, and afterwards transplanted. Cast thy bread upon the waters, says Solomon, for thou shalt find it after many days. In some places, land produces 3 crops of rice in a year. In China, rice is usually sown very thickly on a piece of ground well manured to receive it. And then, when it has sprung up 8 or 10 inches, it is transplanted, small tufts of it being set at regular distances in the muddy ground and thoroughly well watered. When rice is set in a valley whose surface has been deposited by the streams tumbling from the mountains, it has the double advantage of growing in a good soil and of being well supplied with water. In the cultivation of rice, the hoe should not be spared, and when water is not sufficiently abundant from a natural source, artificial means must be adopted to irrigate the ground. The wheel for raising water must be put in motion, and the bamboo pipes must be filled that they may convey the fertilizing stream to every part. Rice, when ripe, is reaped and shaken in small bundles over a large tub. This latter process answers the purpose of threshing it. Such kinds of rice as will not readily shed the corn are thrashed on a floor, like our wheat and barley. Cotton is the woolly or soft downy substance found in the pod of the cotton tree, and few substances have been made more extensively useful to mankind. The cotton tree is cultivated to great extent in India and America as well as in China. In the cotton plantations, when the pods begin to open, women and children go from tree to tree, plucking the cotton and seeds and leaving the husks behind. The seeds are separated from the cotton by being passed through a machine called a gin after an exposure to the sun. It is in this raw state that cotton is usually packed very lightly in bags for exportation. A bag of cotton usually weighs about 300 pounds. The cotton of China is extensively used in the formation of the celebrated Nankin cloth called Nankin. Silk is another important production of China, and to supply with food the worms which produce it, great attention is paid to the cultivation of the mulberry tree. The prime object with the grow of this tree is to secure as plentiful a supply of healthy leaves with as little fruit as possible. The ground is well manured, and the trees planted at convenient distances arrive at perfection in 3 years. The branches are thinned and pruned with great care. The management of the silkworm requires continual vigilance, as the little industrious insect is easily injured. It is said that even a loud cry or the barking of a dog does it mischief, and for this reason the small houses in which silkworms are nursed are usually in the middle of plantations. The worms must be kept clean, quiet, and free from noisome smells. They are fed with leaves strewn on basket work. When the worms have spun themselves up in their cocoons, which they do in about a week, a part of them are left to turn into moths, but the greater part are killed lest they should spoil the silk by eating through the cocoon. They are killed by being placed in jars under salt and leaves, kept close from the air. The silk is wound off the cocoons as they lie floating in water. The worm, the silken worm. He is one of a happy and wealthy firm. He lives at his ease mid the mulberry trees, weaving his web by slow degrees. He quaffs his goblet of sparkling dew and dines on the best, for his cares are few. His coat is fashioned of velvet and gold, and in silken robes during winter cold. He gathers his own little self to sleep, careless of those who wake and weep. Ha ha ha, he is snug on high, dreaming of wings and a sunny sky.